"You'll figure it out," he said. "You always do." Then he grabbed his carry-on and walked out the door, while I was sitting on the bathroom floor, contractions coming every 12 minutes. That was the moment I knew exactly who I had married. His name is Trevor Ashford, 41 years old, project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Calgary. We'd been together for 6 years, married for 3. He was charming when we first met, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and texted good morning without prompting. The kind of man who made you think you'd finally chosen well. I'm Simone. I'm 37. I was a senior forensic accountant at a regional firm that handled fraud investigations for corporate clients across Alberta. I say was, because everything changed in the span of about 3 weeks last October, and by the time it was over, I wasn't the same person anymore. I want to be very clear about that. The version of me that trusted Trevor Ashford no longer exists. I need to go back a bit so you understand how we got there. Trevor's parents, Gerald Ashford, 68, retired pipefitter, and Lorraine Ashford, 65, homemaker, had been planning a cruise for over a year. 2 weeks on a ship from Vancouver to Alaska and back, with a stopover in Juneau. It had been Lorraine's dream trip ever since she'd seen a documentary about the Inside Passage. Gerald had booked it for their 45th wedding anniversary, and Trevor talked about it the way other men talk about the Super Bowl. Like it was the most important event of the calendar year. The problem was that the cruise was scheduled to depart on October 14th. My due date was October 15th. I want you to sit with that for a second. When we found out I was pregnant, I assumed, the way any reasonable person would assume, that Trevor would quietly tell his parents it wasn't the right time, that he'd explain the situation, that they'd understand, and that they would reschedule, or he would simply meet them somewhere down the road. I never even asked him directly, because it seemed so obvious to me that no conversation needed to be had. I was wrong about that. I found out in early September that Trevor had no intention of missing the cruise. He mentioned it casually, the way you'd mention forgetting to pick up milk. We were eating dinner, some pasta I'd made from a Jamie Oliver recipe, and he said something about confirming his flight to Vancouver, and I just looked at him. "What do you mean, confirming your flight?" I said. "For Mom and Dad's cruise departure. I fly out the 13th, we board the 14th, back by the 28th. He was scrolling his phone while he talked. "Trevor, I'm due on the 15th. Babies are almost never born on their due date." I put my fork down. "So your plan is to be on a ship in the Pacific Ocean when our child is born?" He looked up then. He had this expression he made when he thought I was being unreasonable. A slight tightening went around the eyes, like he was bracing for a lecture. "My parents have been planning this for 14 months. The deposit alone was $4,000, and you just said it yourself. It's your due date, not your birth date. You could go 2 weeks either way, or I could go exactly on time," I said. "Or early, Simone, you're very capable. Your sister lives 20 minutes away. The hospital is excellent. I don't see why this needs to be a crisis." He actually said that. My sister Bridget, 34 years old, elementary school vice principal, the kind of person who will drive to your house at 2 in the morning if you need her, had already told me she'd be there for every appointment, every class, every moment I needed. She and her husband, Damien, a paramedic with the city of Calgary, had been more excited about this baby than Trevor had seemed in months. I had noticed that. I hadn't wanted to name it, but had noticed. The weeks leading up to October were strained. Trevor and I had what I can only describe as a series of non-arguments. Conversations where I would express concern, and he would respond with logistics, as though my feelings were simply a planning problem that could be solved with the right spreadsheet. He cited studies about due dates. He mentioned that his mother had specifically requested he be there for the boarding, because she was nervous about the ship. He told me his parents were counting on him. At no point did he suggest that I was the person he was supposed to be counting on. I went to my 38-week appointment alone. Trevor had a site meeting. Dr. Hensley told me everything looked good, that the baby was positioned well, and I was starting to efface, which could mean another week or could mean another 3. I sat in the parking lot of the Foothills Medical Center afterward and cried for about 10 minutes, then I wiped my face and drove home. That night, I opened our joint account for the first time in about 6 weeks. I want to explain why I hadn't been checking it. When you're 7 months pregnant and working full-time and managing a household largely on your own, you develop a kind of tunnel vision. I was monitoring our personal savings account, the one I kept in my own name from before we married, because that's where my direct deposit landed, and I was tracking my mat leave calculations carefully. Our joint account was for household expenses, mortgage, groceries, utilities, and I had automatic payments set up. I trusted the system I'd built. I hadn't looked at the raw balance in a while. I looked at it that night. The account had $847.12 in it. We should have had just over $22,000 in that account. That was our household buffer, our emergency fund, the money we had agreed. In writing, as part of a financial plan we'd made with an advisor at RBC 3 years earlier, would never drop below 15,000. I read the number 3 times, then I pulled up the transaction history. What I found when I started pulling the data into a spreadsheet, because old habits don't die and I am very good at my job, was that Trevor had been making a series of transfers over the past 4 months. Some to an account number I didn't recognize, some as cash withdrawals at ATMs in the northwest part of the city, nowhere near our house or his office. The largest single transfer, $8,400, had gone out on a Tuesday in August while I was at a client site in Edmonton. I'm a forensic accountant. I have spent 12 years finding exactly this kind of thing in other people's financial records. I sat at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, 38 weeks pregnant, and I felt something shift in me that I can only describe as a door closing, not slamming, just quietly, permanently closing. I didn't confront Trevor that night. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, went to bed, and stared at the ceiling until about 3 in the morning, thinking through every step I needed to take. By the time I fell asleep, I had a plan. The next morning, I called a colleague I trusted at the firm and asked her to run a background financial check, quietly, off the books, as a favor, on the account number the transfers had been going to. Then I called a family lawyer whose name I'd seen on a case file 2 years earlier, a woman named Catherine Ossie, who worked out of a downtown office on 8th Avenue and had a reputation for being absolutely relentless on behalf of her clients. I had a phone consultation booked by noon. I did not tell Trevor any of this. I smiled at him over breakfast, asked about the cruise packing list, and watched his face carefully. He was relaxed. He had no idea. 2 days later, my colleague called back. The account the transfers had been going to belonged to a woman named Vanessa Prue, 29 years old, who worked in marketing and lived in an apartment in Kensington. I didn't recognize the name. I Googled her. She had a public Instagram account. Trevor had commented on 14 of her posts over the past year. In one photo from August, you could see in the background a very specific piece of decor. A framed print of a mountain range that I had bought at a market in Banff 2 summers ago, the one I'd put in our guest bedroom. She had it in her apartment. I sat with that information for a long time. Catherine Ossie, my lawyer, was everything her reputation promised. When I laid out what I had found, she didn't look shocked. She looked focused. We talked for 90 minutes in her office, and by the time I left, I had a clear understanding of my position, what needed to be documented, what I needed to do and not do before Trevor left for Vancouver, and exactly what would happen when I was ready to move. "Don't tip him off," Catherine said. "Not yet. Let him go on his trip. That actually works in your favor." Trevor left on October 13th as planned. He kissed me on the forehead. He said to text him when things started happening. He said his mom was so excited for the cruise. He asked if I'd be okay managing the hospital bag on my own, because he'd read that labor could take a long time with first babies and there was probably nothing to worry about. "I'll be fine," I told him. "Go be with your family." He didn't catch the way I said it. Bridget was at my door an hour after he left. She'd taken 2 weeks off work, which she hadn't told me until that moment, just appeared on my doorstep with a bag of groceries and her overnight things and Damien right behind her. I started crying before she even got inside. She held me in the doorway for a long time and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. "He doesn't deserve to be here for this," she finally said. "I know," I said. "Then let's make sure he isn't." I want to be honest. October 14th was the worst and best day of my life, and those two things existed completely separately from each other. It was worst because I was alone in the sense that matters. The person who had promised to be my partner had chosen a ship cabin over a delivery room, and no amount of rationalization made that easier to hold. When the contractions started properly at around 6 in the morning, I called Bridget, and she and Damien drove me in while I gripped the door handle and breathed through each wave. At one point in triage, a nurse asked me where my husband was, and I said, "Alaska," and she looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not pity, exactly, but something more like recognition, and she said, "Okay, we've got you." It was best because Eleanor Rose was born at 4:47 in the afternoon, 8 pounds 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and the most specific scream I have ever heard in my life. Bridget was in the room. Damien was in the waiting area with coffee and sandwiches, and a card signed by what looked like everyone in their neighborhood. When Eleanor was placed on my chest, and she stopped crying and just looked at me with those unfocused newborn eyes, I understood something I hadn't understood before. I understood that I would burn the entire world down for this person, and I would also build it back up, and I was going to do both of those things without Trevor Ashford. He found out via text. I sent him a photo of Eleanor at 5:30 that evening. He called immediately, voice bright and a little too loud in a way that told me he was somewhere public on the ship. "She's beautiful," he said. "Oh my God, Simone, she came early. She came right on time," I said. "Her name is Eleanor." "I love that. Are you okay? Is everything okay?" "Everything is exactly as it should be," I said, and that was true. "Enjoy the rest of your trip." I hung up before he could say anything else. Catherine had already begun the filing process the day before. She had everything she needed: the financial records I'd provided, the documentation of the transfers, the timeline, the third-party account information. By the time Eleanor and I came home from the hospital on October 16th, there was a process server waiting for a signal from Catherine and a court order in preparation regarding our joint assets. Catherine had also arranged for a temporary freeze on the remaining joint accounts pending the financial disclosure proceedings. Trevor called 3 times a day for the first 4 days. I answered twice, briefly, told him Eleanor was healthy and I needed to rest, and kept my voice pleasant. He seemed to interpret this as forgiveness warming on the horizon, which told me a great deal about how little he actually knew me. On October 20th, Catherine sent him the formal separation notice and the financial disclosure demand by registered mail to our home address, where it would be waiting for him when the ship docked. He called me from Vancouver on the 28th, the day they disembarked. I was sitting in Bridget's kitchen feeding Eleanor while Bridget made soup. "What is happening?" he said. The bright voice was gone. "You already know," I said. "Simone, this is insane. We need to talk. We can work through this." "Whatever you think you found, Trevor, I'm a forensic accountant. I know exactly what I found." A long silence. "I made mistakes," he said finally. "I know I did, but this serving me with papers, freezing accounts, that's not the answer. We have a daughter. She's 2 weeks old." "She is," I said. "And because of that, I need the financial disclosure completed by the deadline Catherine specified. I'm going to go now." "Wait, Simone, are you at the house?" "I'm driving back from Vancouver. I'll be there tomorrow morning." "I'm not at the house right now," I said. "And when you get there, please be aware that Catherine will be in contact about next steps regarding the property." Bridget looked at me from across the kitchen. I gave her a small nod. What Trevor did not know was that over the previous 2 weeks, while he had been watching glaciers from a deck chair, Catherine had uncovered the full scope of what he'd been doing. The transfers to Vanessa Prue's account totaled just under $40,000 over 14 months. Some of it appeared to be rent. Vanessa's apartment lease had started around the same time as the first transfer, and the monthly amounts aligned. There were also records of hotel stays, restaurant charges, 2 flights to Toronto. Trevor had been financing an entirely separate life with our household money we had both contributed to, and he had done it methodically enough that he'd clearly believed I would never look. He had forgotten, or perhaps never fully registered, what I do for a living. Gerald and Lorraine Ashford arrived at our house the morning after Trevor got back, which was a choice I found remarkable. I was not there. Eleanor and I were staying at Bridget's. But our neighbor, a retired school teacher named Howard, who had known me for 4 years and had brought soup twice while I was on bed rest, saw them at the door and called me. "There are 2 older people here," Howard said, "and a man who looks like he hasn't slept. Should I be concerned?" "No," I said. "Just don't let them in." Trevor texted me that his parents were very upset and needed to understand what was happening to the family. I considered that for a moment, the idea that Lorraine and Gerald, who had watched their son leave his laboring wife to come and wave them onto a cruise ship, were now the aggrieved parties who needed things explained to them. I chose not to respond to that text. The financial disclosure process revealed, among other things, that Trevor had also taken out a personal line of credit using our home equity as collateral, something that required my signature on the original paperwork. Catherine reviewed the documents. The signature on the line of credit application was not mine. She flagged it immediately to the appropriate parties and noted that this would need to be addressed through additional channels beyond civil proceedings. I will not say I felt nothing when I heard that. I did feel something. I felt tired and very clear, and a kind of grief that didn't have much to do with Trevor personally anymore, but had everything to do with the years I'd spent not looking closely enough. I was angry at myself for that, and then I decided to stop being angry at myself, because I am a professional who investigates this for other people, and I am also a human being who trusted her husband, and those 2 things were allowed to coexist. By December, Trevor had moved into a temporary rental in the Northeast. The house was being assessed. Eleanor and I had come home. I had the locks changed, a new alarm code set, and Bridget's number on speed dial. Eleanor slept in a bassinet beside my bed, and I watched her breathe in the dark and felt something I can only call determined. Trevor tried, in the mediation sessions that Catherine recommended as a first step, to present the affair and the financial misconduct as separate issues, as though the money had been mismanaged, but the relationship had simply broken down, and could we please handle things civilly? Catherine did not allow him to separate those threads. She was very good at her job. Lorraine Ashford sent me a card at Christmas. It was one of those generic seasonal cards, the kind with a snow scene and a verse inside, and she had written a note asking if we could move forward as a family for the sake of the baby settin'. She signed it Grandma Lorraine, as though that name had been established. I put the card in a file folder with a note of the date received, as Catherine had instructed me to do with all unsolicited contact from the Ashford family. I did not send one back. The line of credit matter was resolved in a way I am not able to discuss in detail here, but I will say that it resulted in consequences for Trevor that extended beyond the divorce proceedings, and that the phrase forgery was used in official correspondence. Gerald Ashford retained a lawyer of his own at that point and submitted a written statement distancing himself from any knowledge of his son's financial activity. I thought that was very interesting timing. My daughter is 6 months old now. She has Trevor's eye shape and my laugh, which is an inconvenient combination that I find I am making my peace with. She has met her Aunt Bridget so many times that she reaches for her automatically when Bridget walks into the room. She has not met Lorraine and Gerald Ashford, and that situation is being managed carefully by Catherine and a family court mediator as part of the broader proceedings. I don't have strong feelings either way about grandparental access, but I do have very specific requirements about the conditions under which it would occur. And so far, those conditions have not been met. Trevor asked me once, in one of the mediation sessions, whether I had planned everything, the filing, the timing, letting him go on the trip, as some kind of calculated revenge. I thought about that. I thought about sitting on the bathroom floor during contractions while he checked his carry-on. I thought about the night I pulled up the bank account and found $847.12. I thought about Eleanor's face in those first seconds. I planned to protect myself and my daughter, I said. That's all. He didn't look convinced. That was fine. He didn't need to be. I've thought a lot about what I would tell someone who found herself where I was. 37 weeks pregnant, husband walking out the door, a sinking feeling that the math of her marriage had never quite added up. I think what I would say is this: the moment you start making excuses for someone else's absence is the moment you need to start paying very close attention, not to them, to yourself, to the accounts, to the small details that don't add up. Because the truth has a way of sitting quietly in the numbers, waiting for someone with enough patience to look. I looked. Eleanor is asleep in the next room right now. I can hear her on the monitor, the small, even sound of her breathing. Bridget is coming over tomorrow morning with bagels and her terrible taste in reality television, and we're going to sit on my couch and not talk about Trevor Ashford for an entire afternoon.
That is the price he pays.
And I think that's entirely fair.